Good morning. My name is Jonathan Burst with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and thanks for joining us today. To start out, I'm going to go through a few housekeeping items. So Courtney, next slide, please. We have enabled closed captioning for this webinar, which you can adjust or hide by clicking on the box at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded, and we will post the recording to CMAP's YouTube channel when we're done today, in case you want to revisit it or share it with others. And we have set aside time at the end for audience questions, so please submit your questions in the question box, which my colleagues are monitoring. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for. Thank you. Next slide. Well, vaccines are being distributed, and we hope life may be returning to normal in the not too distant future. Many households in our region are still dealing with the economic fallout of COVID-19, particularly renters. With the COVID relief bills passed in December and February, new money to help renters and landlords struggling with unpaid rent is set to flow into the region. In fact, you may have already seen or heard about some of these programs. Cook County opened its program in mid-March and is accepting applications through 5 o'clock today. Lake County launched their program earlier this week, and more will be rolling out shortly, including a new statewide program from the Illinois Housing Development Authority, or IDA. Municipalities play an important role in connecting residents and landlords to these resources. And today you will hear from 4 speakers to help educate you about the resources that are out there for landlords and renters, and what your community can do to connect residents and landlords to these resources. And with that, let me introduce you to our 4 speakers. First, we have Rodrigo Carrillo, Director of Strategic Initiatives and Planning for the Illinois Housing Development Authority, or IDA, who will speak about IDA's new rental assistance program. We have Esther Salutillo, a licensed clinical social worker and Deputy Director of Human Services from the Village of Mount Prospect, who will talk about some of the ways that Mount Prospect has been working with their local landlords and renters. We have Kyle Smith, Director of Housing and Community Development with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, who will talk about best practices from other communities around the region. And finally, we have Stacie Young, Director of the Preservation Compact at the Community Investment Corporation, or CIC, who will talk about the resources that CIC has for landlords right now and what municipalities can do to help landlords access those resources. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist, Rodrigo. Well, it looks like we might be having a technical difficulty. Maybe we'll switch things up. Esther, do you mind starting for us today?
No, I don't. I'll jump right in.
Thanks so much.
No worries. You think after a year of being in the pandemic, we would have figured out all these tech issues, right?
Always the fun of live events.
That's right. So thank you, Jonathan. As Jonathan mentioned, my name is Esther Salutillo, and I am the Deputy Director for the Human Services Department at the Village of Mount Prospect. And our department provides social services assistance to Mount Prospect residents. Courtney, next slide, please. Thank you. So our department has 2 locations. One is at Village Hall, and the other is at the Community Connection Center. And we're staffed by 10, and that includes 2 administrative assistants, an office manager, a public health nurse, 5 social workers, and 1 caseworker, which includes the director, deputy director, the police social worker who is housed at the police department and collaborates with officers on cases and calls that are related to mental health, substance abuse, domestic violence, victims of crime. We also have a senior services social worker that works with residents ages 60 and over, in addition to their loved ones. And lastly, we have a case management social worker. Oh, there we go. A case management social worker and a bilingual caseworker. Next slide, please. Thank you. So from the beginning of the pandemic, we kept track of all the residents who contacted our department for assistance. So since March of 2020, we've had approximately 500 residents call in requesting assistance from our department. And most of those requests fell under three categories, one being the food pantry, the second being utility assistance, and lastly, of course, why we're here today, rental assistance. And through our conversation with these callers, we've been able to identify the occupations most impacted, and that included day laborers. So these are people that rely on staffing companies for leads on work, gig workers, restaurant workers, and service industry workers, such as hotel staff. Next slide, please. So early on in the pandemic, we quickly realized that two programs that fall under our emergency assistance program would be heavily utilized. And we particularly took notice of this once Governor Pritzker stated he would issue the stay-at-home order. So we quickly had to pivot and increase some of the services that we currently offer, or that we were offering pre-pandemic during normal times, if you could imagine what that was like prior to March 2020. So our food pantry program allows residents to access food pantry once per month. At the start of the pandemic, we shifted that and allowed residents to pick up food pantry, which are prepackaged bags of food, from monthly to weekly in order to limit, or I guess, reduce the likelihood of food instability and those workers that found themselves having an income to no longer having an income. So being able to access food. So since March of 2020, we've distributed 764 service units of food pantry, which that approximately makes up 2,200 bags of food. So each family can receive on average about 3 bags of food. It just all depends on the size of their family. We also realized that perishable items were going to be a necessity, especially for those that found themselves no longer having an income. Our food pantry at this moment does not carry perishable items. So we started a gift card drive through social media in order to help families purchase these items, which include fresh fruits and veggies, proteins, meats, toiletries, and etc. We've been able to receive in donations and put back into the community $16,000 worth of gift cards, which is phenomenal. Another program that we knew would need a very high, or I guess that residents would be attempting to utilize, is our emergency financial assistance program. And this program is funded specifically and solely through donations. And these donations come in the form of cash, checks, gift cards, and early in the pandemic, we shifted to be a little bit more tech savvy and started a PayPal account, which allowed people who wanted to donate and were able to donate to contribute to our program via the internet. And what's great about PayPal is that donors can earmark their funds to specific areas, such as solely for food pantry or solely for financial assistance, or the COVID-19 pandemic, we would then utilize those funds to put into either food pantry or emergency financial assistance. Next slide, please. So through donations, we've been able to help residents with about $55,600 in rental assistance. Our department also participates in the Salvation Army Extension Volunteer Program. And we've been able to help residents apply for and leverage rental assistance in the amount of $47,300. We've also assisted residents with utility assistance, with night core, electric bills, and also water bills. Next slide, please. So as many of you know, that the pandemic has shed light on many of the barriers that residents or people within your community are experiencing. And we quickly realized that the barriers would be around the area of technology. Many of our residents knew of assistance that was out there through online portals and online applications, but unfortunately just lacked the things in order to complete these applications. So we started helping residents apply for different programs such as the Cook County COVID-19 Recovery Rental Assistance applications, the IDA rental assistance applications. ComEd also has a program called Helping Hands, which allows residents or ComEd customers to apply for up to $300 worth of assistance that goes towards a past due bill. We've also been able to help residents complete unemployment benefit applications. So we found that residents weren't only having technology barriers, but they were also uneducated in what unemployment was. Some of the self-contractors, they applied for regular unemployment benefits, then received a denial letter and didn't realize that they then can apply for PUA benefits. So not only helping residents apply for those programs, but also providing some of that education on programs that they may be eligible for. One of the local senators' office here in Mount Prospect also was instrumental and has been instrumental in advocating for some of these residents with IDES. As you know, many people experience lots of issues in receiving benefits, getting in contact with IDES. So this office was able to help us achieve great outcomes and finally getting benefits in the hands of people. We also were in contact and are in contact with the local township offices and helped residents apply for LIHEAP. Although during normal situations, we help residents apply for Medicaid and SNAP, but we have seen an increase in residents newly needing these services and really never having to navigate applying for state benefits. So we've seen an increase in new applications. We've also helped residents apply for the PEBT card, which is similar to the Link card, but these funds specifically came from the CARES Act and went to households that had children, school-age children that were on the free and reduced lunch program. Next slide, please. So the village, I think, has done a really great job at reaching out to residents and landlords and informing them of resources and grants available for rental assistance, for small business loans, small business grants. And one way they've been able to do that has been by creating a dedicated COVID-19 information page. And on this page, residents, landlords, even small businesses can log on, get the links that they could directly go to apply for these programs. We've also posted information on our social media pages. As we know, social media is a big deal these days and many people get their information and news from there. Our department also has an email list where clients have opted in to receive emails about programs and services. So we definitely made use of that to try to get the word out. And we also leverage some of the partners that we have within the community. So sending information to local school social workers and local schools, townships, and other social service agencies. We also found ourselves providing education around renters' rights. And that included informing residents about the eviction moratorium, who is eligible and protected under that executive order, who isn't, and what they have to do in order to be protected under the eviction moratorium. And lastly, unfortunately, there have been some situations where a landlord's behavior has been questionable. So we help link them with fair housing agencies that would be able to provide free legal consultation and hopefully either be able to help them legally or mediate the situation between the tenant and the landlord. Next slide, please. So early on, of course, we knew that, or I guess we started to realize that the need would be high, but then what would happen once the eviction moratorium was lifted. And we really had no way of knowing how big the issue was of tenants being behind on their rent. So in August of 2020, I collaborated with our crime-free housing coordinator, and we created a survey for landlords and property managers. And we were able to obtain information about their email through our community development department. And they provided us with a list of people who had a rental property license in Mount Prospect. So we emailed this survey to 700 landlords, property managers, and owners. And the survey was a 5-question survey, pretty easy, straightforward. And the questions were, how many units do you own, manage in Mount Prospect? How many tenants currently owe more than 2 months of rent? Of the number of tenants that currently owe more than 2 months of rent, how many are on a payment plan? How many tenants with delinquent rent payments will you be seeking eviction once the moratorium ends? And what solutions have you implemented to work with tenants who are delinquent on rent? So really, some of our goals were to gauge how many residents were behind on rent, what strategies landlords were already implementing to hopefully work with their tenants so that we can begin to strategize at the village and within the Human Services Department on what we might be able to do to prevent a wave of evictions. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, the survey response was low. However, it did provide some insight. We received 46 responses, and of those 46, 1,169 total units were managed or owned by the people who responded. Only 16 were delinquent at the time. 4 tenants were on a payment plan. 6 landlords planned on seeking eviction. And what I think we found most interesting were some of the strategies that landlords were implementing, which included reducing rent by 20%, offering a payment plan and waiving 1 month of rent, waived late fees. So any of you that work within this milieu, late fees can really place a tenant in a deep debt hole that they may not be able to climb out of. So we're really happy that landlords were willing to waive these late payments, even if the person was behind multiple months of rent. And lastly, some landlords were assisting with providing referrals and completing applications for rental assistance. Next slide, please. So the village receives CDBG funds. CDBG, it's an acronym for Community Development Block Grant through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which must benefit low and moderate income residents. The CARES Act provided supplemental CDBG funds to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus pandemic. Once the village was notified of the CDBG-CV award, we consulted with stakeholders to identify potential uses of these funds and what were the priority of needs of residents. Internally, our CDBG administrator met with village departments, social service agencies, businesses, and other municipalities to understand what the local needs were. Human Services, our department, provided insight into the demand for basic needs such as food, rental assistance, and medical care. These discussions revealed a high level of need for rental assistance due to COVID-related unemployment and illness. Landlords also expressed interest in rental assistance to stabilize properties with high levels of delinquency. Next slide, please. The village initially committed $59,000 of these funds for rental assistance. 2 months into the program, it became pretty clear that the demand would exceed the available dollars. So the village committed to an additional $50,000 in CDBG funds for the program, which totaled $109,000. Qualifying residents can receive up to 3 months of assistance, covering delinquent rent as far back as April 2020. The delinquency is verified and payments are sent directly to the landlord. Applicants must disclose other sources of rent relief and are prohibited from obtaining duplicative funding. Other sources of rent relief may include IHDA, emergency assistance, Cook County COVID-19 recovery programs, and et cetera. The funds, the CDBG-CV rental assistance program is administered by a CDBG subrecipient, which is typically a social service agency, and Human Services screen and refer appropriate residents. So we have residents called into our department. We screen to ensure that they were impacted by COVID. We then provide linkage directly to this subrecipient. And through that agency, they can apply for these funds, verify eligibility, and works with the landlord to coordinate payments. And that is it for me.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Esther. I'm going to hand it over now to Kyle Smith. And Kyle, can you talk to us just a little bit about other things you've seen municipalities doing in this space around the region?
Sure, I'm happy to. I'm Kyle Smith. I'm the Housing and Community Development Director with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, and I serve as staff liaison to our Housing and Community Development Committee. There are many who participate in that committee here today. I was going through the list. It's great to see all of you, and some of you may see your some of the things you're doing on this slide here. Our committee came together last year. I think that the emergency nature of the pandemic really increased focus on these issues at the local level. Most communities, especially those that don't receive community development block grants, are not themselves in the business of administering housing aid. But we really started talking about a lot of things that could be done at the local level to leverage programs that IDA, as well as the counties and the homelessness providers are providing. And I know we're all eager to hear about the IDA program that is coming out soon. And I think that hopefully the Mount Prospect case study, as well as some of these here, are good inspiration for you all thinking about how best to serve your residents. Basically, what we learned through our meetings and a survey that we conducted earlier this year is that local governments can play a really key role in raising awareness of the large amount of rental aid that's coming online this year. Local governments are closest to residents, have a lot of contact lists and engagement activities that don't necessarily exist at larger levels of government, and no strategies are too small. So here are a few things that we heard that municipalities were doing across the region, some of which Mount Prospect has also done. First and foremost, a number of communities were developing resource pages with the various levels of assistance online at the moment. Stacie Young from Preservation Compact is going to be talking in a minute about their page. I'd like to give a plug for that page, and it's a particularly good start and base of information for those looking to develop their own page. We also heard about resource fairs. The South Suburban Mayors and Managers Association and Harvey partnered on an in-person outdoor fair to market both this rent assistance as well as encourage participation in the 2020 census to reach those citizens that do not have good access to broadband. We heard that human services departments can play a key role, as we just heard from Mount Prospect, and walk-in referrals to walk-ins on these available programs are really important to helping residents in need. And then finally, direct landlord engagement. I'm using an example here from Aurora, which administered its own program and sent frequent constant contact emails to its landlords. There are a number of municipalities out there that have landlord licensing or crime-free programs where they may maintain an email list of both their institutional and small mom and pop type landlords. That is a great list to use to send this information, and in the case of mom and pops, may educate them, and they may not even be aware of the aid. So we hope these are helpful. There's a lot going on around the region, and there is a lot that can be done at the local level to raise awareness of the aid that's coming online this year.
All right, thanks so much, Kyle. I think now we're going to turn it over to Rodrigo. And can you talk just a little bit about the upcoming rental assistance program IDA will be launching, I think later on this month?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jonathan. Apologies, technology issues, and it's a Friday, so happy Friday to everyone. We're really excited to be here to talk about the Illinois Rental Payment Program. Next slide, please. IDA is excited to roll out this program that we capitalize on the foundation that we built last year when rolling out ERA, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So as many of you may know or may not know, IDA's mission is to create and preserve affordable housing throughout the state of Illinois. Our impact alone in 2020 was that we have over 3,200 new and preserved affordable rental units. And we had a huge year for home buyers, over 6,600 home buyers in 2020. Next slide, please. So we're here to tell you a little bit about what we did. Last year with the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, it was signed into legislation June 10th. And on August 10th, we opened the portal for emergency rental. in September, we opened a portal for emergency mortgage, and we were able to disperse over $325 million in rental assistance and mortgage assistance. In rental, we assisted over 46,000 households, and in mortgage, we assisted over 10,000 households. For the rental program, we take pride to say that every approved application was funded. We were able to assist over 53% more renter households than we projected, and that all of our funds, or 67% of our funds, were awarded in disproportionately impacted areas of COVID-19. Now, we had some success in different populations and race and ethnicity. We did fall short with Latino populations, 12%, but we are hoping to increase that number for this round. So having big success in doing that, we were the only state in the country to disperse all of the funds by December 30th of 2020, and we were the state that received the largest amount of rental assistance. Next slide, please. So with that, we are excited to build upon what we did in last year and release the Illinois Rental Payment Program. Illinois Rental Payment Program is designed to assist those that are past due on their rent and prevent eviction, and are eligible to apply for this program if they have had a financial hardship by reduction of income or loss of income or incurred significant increase of expenses due to COVID-19. This year, we have over $500 million to disperse throughout the entire state. We want to build on the track record that we have built in 2020, and we're estimating that the program will launch in May. Next slide, please. So what this program will do is pay directly to housing providers up to $25,000 per tenant, which means that would be a past due arrearage of 12 months and 3 months prospective rents. So a total of 15 months up to $25,000 per tenant. These payments will be made directly to the housing provider. If the housing provider does not accept payments, payments will be then, there'll be an opportunity for tenants to apply for assistance on their own. Housing provider must waive all fees and penalties related to the occupancy, and housing providers may not initiate or engage in eviction proceedings on any of the past due rent or coverage period that we have paid. Next slide, please. And so how it works is, but before I say how it works, we did a how did we do tour a few months ago to just find out from stakeholders, advocates, partners, what worked, what didn't work. And we heard communities, and what we did was take some of what we heard and put it on for this rental payment program. And one of those ways is we have decided to start with the housing provider this time. This time, the housing provider starts the joint application. So the application will be started by the housing provider, submit information, and the tenant will then go certify the information, upload a couple documents on their end, and then complete, and that would be a completed application. Tenants can begin an application only if landlords do not start one on their behalf, and there will be a different time frame for that. The difference this time, we heard everyone, is that grant payments will be, as I mentioned, exact based on the tenant need, and it's not a fixed payment. Income eligibility this time is adjusted per household. The income eligibility is below 80% AMI. With a prioritization given to those that are under 50% AMI or who have been unemployed for the past 90 days. And the great feature that we're thrilled to have is that there is an ability to track the status of an application. Next slide. So the application process will be visiting, the housing provider will visit a website. They will complete information regarding housing provider and then a valid tenant email address. and then a complete information about the pass-through rent. Then a confirmation will be sent to the housing provider within 24 hours to do part 2 of the application. Next slide, please. Part 2 of the application is where the housing provider will submit or upload proof of ownership. They will give us information on grant payment information, who is the check made out to. The housing provider will have to provide their social security number or IT number, whichever they purchase a home with. This is not applied to tenants. One big difference is that this program is available to all residents that are eligible, regardless of documentation status. We will need information on the rental unit and then consent to the program terms. Once that is completed, then the tenant will receive the completed application. Tenant will upload an ID, a government ID, regardless of expiration date, proof of address, if their address is not on their ID, and then proof of income. This is a change from the first round. Treasury has implemented guidelines to obtain proof of income for 2020. If there's no income or cash payments, we do have an attestation form in which someone will be able to complete. Next slide, please. Once that is completed, that will be a complete full application that our review team will begin processing the review. So as a recap, the coverage period is a 12-month arrearage, 3-month perspective. The coverage period will be May 2020 through July 2020. The maximum grant amount, $25,000. Assistance is paid directly to housing providers. Unless unresponsive, then the tenant will have an opportunity to apply. The landlord application period will open in May. It'll be about a 3-week portal with an additional week for tenants to complete their applications. We expect payouts to happen late spring of this year. And the program will close, another change that was recently made, in September of 2022. Next slide, please. So this is a quick snapshot of what information to start gathering for those that are interested in applying. As a housing provider, you will note on your right, evidence of property ownership, which would be a tax bill or a monthly mortgage statement. A current signed lease, if available. If there is no lease available, then the application has language that will cover that. Written documentation of pass-through rent. So that could be a form of a rent pass-through notice, a 5-day notice if one submitted, 30-day notice, eviction notice, or other forms such as a rent roll. Those are the 3 documents that we are asking for. On the tenant side, we need a government issued ID, regardless of where it's from or expiration date. If their ID does not have their unit address, a proof of address, which would be a utility bill, cell phone bill, bank statement. We'll capture all those acceptable forms of documentation on our website. And if applicable, evidence of other government assistance programs like SNAP or TANF that can possibly fast track that application. And lastly, proof of household income in terms of, for 2020, in terms of like a 1040 or a pay stub or a W-2 or even a letter from an employer or that written attestation form that I talked about. These are the documents that we should start gathering as tenants and housing providers. Next slide, please. So one of the also things that we note is that we created a application portal that is accessible throughout the entire state due to technology. But we know that there are communities that face technology barriers and language barriers. Much like the first round, this time we enlisted 64 community partner agencies, which are called housing stability servicers, throughout the entire state. So these 64 agencies cover the entire state of Illinois, and they are going to partner with us to help us with helping landlords, smaller landlords, apply, complete the application, helping tenants complete their application. And we know that some of them also need help creating an email. We heard that the first time around. Some people don't have emails. These agencies would help with that. When a tenant or a landlord was unsure of the program or of participating in the first round, we encourage them to have conversations with these community agencies to explain the benefits of these programs for both parties and what happens if an eviction goes through. So we really need those community partner agencies. So what are the next steps? Well, part of them was here is to tell all of you that this program is coming in May and that we'll definitely be on the lookout on our website at ida.org for more information. Gather the required documentations if you have them ready. So this way your application will be much faster. And then also to let us know if you have a particular group or a set of advocates that you want us to do this presentation, we'd be more than happy to do so. And with that, I just want to say thank you again, and we look forward to rolling out a successful program.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rodrigo. I think we're going to turn it over to Stacie now. And Stacie, can you talk to us a little bit about the resources that CIC has available for landlords right now and what municipalities can do to help folks access those resources?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I'm really excited to be here today, although I must admit, Rodrigo is a very tough act to follow. I've been working with him a lot, along with comrades at Cook County and the city of Chicago about all of the rental assistance programs. And we convene weekly at 8 a.m. And Rodrigo's always in great spirits. And sometimes I'm pretty sure he hasn't slept. So appreciate his wonderful partnership. We can get started on the presentation here. So I'm going to talk for a minute about who CIC and the Preservation Compact are. I'm going to talk a little bit about naturally occurring affordable housing, which just means unsubsidized rental housing, what typical owners look like, but I'm really going to spend the bulk of my time talking about resources, both at CIC and other organizations that might be able to help your renters in your communities with some support. So Community Investment Corporation, CIC, is a nonprofit lender. We're a community development financial institution, and we have been working on providing financing for these owners for the past 35 years. The Preservation Compact is a policy collaborative. So we have a lot of partners, from for-profit developers to nonprofit developers and community groups and grassroots and tenant groups, but also, and I think most importantly, government. So all levels of government. I was just talking about IDA, but also Cook County, the city of Chicago, the Chicago Housing Authority, and HUD at the federal level. And I'm here talking about rental buildings because you all know how important it is to keep those buildings strong and healthy. And we know from the last crash that the buildings are vulnerable to deterioration and loss once that stability is undermined. Next slide, please. So who are these owners? Again, I mean, it sounds like Esther and probably a lot of you here have a really good handle on this already, but we're talking about small owners. We think about little restaurants and cupcake shops as small businesses that we need to support, but we usually don't discuss how we can support building owners as small businesses. They house our families, they hire local residents, and they purchase from local vendors. So they're really important to support and make sure that they and their tenants are strong. It's CIC's, the experience at CIC in terms of lending to these borrowers, and we typically do about 70 million in loans every year to finance these guys buying buildings and fixing them up. Nearly half of our borrowers are minority-owned businesses, and they're small. They have 4 employees, and they typically own about 35 units, so it can be hard to reach them. Again, as just to reiterate what a lot of these folks have already said. And in terms of who lives in these buildings, again, in our buildings, 92% of the tenants earn less than $40,000 a year, which isn't much, especially when you factor in how many of them work in jobs that have been affected by COVID. Next slide, please. This is just a picture of some of our borrowers. So they range from, owning several several buildings and having maybe a couple hundred units in their portfolio to owning 1/6 flat. Maybe they inherited it for someone or they're starting a new business and this is something they're doing on the side. Next slide, please. So you already know all this in terms of who's been affected by COVID. Again, just trying to give this backdrop. These are low-income renters and people of color who are more likely to be affected in those in their jobs, living in low and moderate income neighborhoods. And of course, the nature of being a small owner is that you are very vulnerable. This is true for all small businesses. So in this time, less rent, of course, means less investment into the buildings. And we hate to see that buildings deteriorate and then lead to problems on the block in the larger neighborhood. So it's important, again, we don't want the tenants being unable to pay rent to affect the building owner, unable to keep up their buildings and potentially be unable to pay their bills. Next slide, please. So really quickly, I mean, some data that's been collected, and again, Esther, really awesome data and outreach to your owners to understand where they're at. This is actually old data. I think it's probably a bit worse now. But this is a national survey. 1 in 4 small building owners had to borrow money to stay afloat. And you can see that, you know, depending on the race of the owner, you know, it's worse for the Black owners and the Latinx owners a little bit more than the white owners. And 12% of landlords had a mortgage that was in forbearance. Next slide, please. So again, this is reiterating a lot of what you've already heard. Engaging building owners, again, hats off to Esther and Mount Prospect, really doing a great job connecting and trying to make sure that there is some communication with those building owners early on, and encouraging the building owners to reach out to their tenants, encouraging the building owners that not only getting accustomed to thinking about knowing that these programs haven't opened yet. The emergency rental programs, both at IDA and the city of Chicago, in case you're thinking about the city of Chicago, haven't opened, but familiarizing yourselves with all of the documentation, as Rodrigo just said, gathering the documentation in advance, and to the extent that there are issues, connecting to those outreach partners. Rodrigo, again, all of the agencies administering this recognize the importance of community partners to make sure that tenants and building owners feel like they can ask questions and feel comfortable. Last slide, please. So outreach and coordination, can't say it enough, but here are a few other resources to keep in mind. Sometimes there's tension between the owners and the tenants. I mean, this is not surprising, not all the time, but certainly we want to be cognizant of that. And one really great resource that doesn't cost any money is the Center for Conflict Resolution. The Center for Conflict Resolution, this is not mandatory arbitration. This is not court. So in some cases it's court ordered, but this is a very flexible resource. A tenant can reach out to the Center for Conflict Resolution if they're trying to reach their landlord and the landlord isn't responding. The building owner, the housing provider can also reach out directly to the Center for Conflict Resolution and say, you know, can you help out here? They are really trying to be a bridge builder, and then they can talk through mutually agreed upon plans to move forward. And if there isn't a mutually agreed upon plan, then nothing happens, and that's fine. But sometimes this could be a nice way to sort of gently, from a municipality's perspective, you can let both parties know that this resource is available. If I'm a tenant and I hear from my housing provider that there's this great resource called the Center for Conflict Resolution, and I've never heard of that before, I might presume that that resource will take my landlord's point of view. But if the municipality is the source of information, it's kind of like a, well, obviously a more neutral party messenger. It's a great resource. Again, I think this has come up before. The state has so much money for utility assistance that's available right now. That's something that everyone should be reaching out and trying to figure out if they're eligible, how to access it, because that's something you can do right now. Property management training is something that's available through Community Investment Corporation. This is, as Rodrigo said, and he's really good at these webinars, as you can see, we too are happy to come out to a municipality or a sub-region to talk about the best practices as it relates to property management training. We have a full-time staff person devoted to this, and she has customized webinars that she does for owners if there's a particular issue to cover. She has broad classes with a set curriculum. It's a really nice resource, and even seasoned property managers and owners appreciate the refresher course. So we're happy to work with you on that. Of course, our bread and butter is financing. We provide financing for acquisition and rehab. Sometimes we'll work with a smaller owner in a way that a commercial lender will not. That's why CIC was created, in order to be more of a hands-on, hand-holding, really understanding the markets and being able to work closely with even small owners just getting started. That's what we do. Again, for those owners who maybe got started right before COVID began, again, it's CIC. We're happy to work with them, whether it's a property management training course for lots of folks or just walking through what an owner should be thinking about if they're struggling during this time. As Kyle said, and I appreciate the plug, this page on our Preservation Compact website, we have a resource page dedicated not just to housing resources, but all the types of resources that Esther was talking about, from unemployment and utility assistance. There's even a page where you fill in your information as someone who was affected by COVID, and it will tell you what you are eligible for. So this is a really helpful set of resources. We tried to be a little careful in how we laid out the information, so it's not too confusing because there's just so much flying around. But feel free to look at that. Feel free to ask questions if you have them. And I also posted in the chat a little while ago in response to a question. We worked closely, the Preservation Compact has been working closely. We will meet again next week, as I said, with IDA, the city of Chicago, and Cook County to talk about those rental assistance, the emergency rental assistance programs. And there's one web page that we put together, and I posted that link in the chat. This is just a nice way to familiarize yourself generally with what the programs have in common and how they might be different, and the types of documentation to start to gather. So if you're focused like a laser on IDA, you should absolutely just go to the IDA website, because the IDA website that Rodrigo mentioned before has all the detail on that. But if you're curious about how those three programs, the state, the county, and the city, kind of relate to each other, you might check out that Chai Cook Ill Rent Help .org website. And that's all I have.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for that, Stacie, and thanks to all of our panelists and speakers today. We're going to move on to questions now. As a reminder, please submit your questions in the question box, and my colleagues are monitoring that so we can lift those up and ask those during the Q&A period here. I know many of you have been spending time asking questions throughout that, and we've had folks in the background typing away, some of our panelists, some other help and support people also answering questions. So if there's questions that you've had, it's always good to also check through the Q&A, because some of those may have been covered for good additional material there. I also just want to call out, because I've seen this question a few times, we'll be circulating follow-up to all the attendees, the slides and other materials with this from this session. So keep an eye out for that. I know a lot of you have been requesting access to the slides because you think it'll be really helpful for your follow-up activities. And so we'll make sure to provide that as well. While you are all working on submitting questions, I'm going to start with just a few questions for our panelists. So the first one is for all of our speakers. As we can see, there's a whole bunch of different financial resources available at the federal, state, and local levels. How have you seen municipalities handle about communicating all these different resources with different timeframes and different requirements? And maybe Esther, you would like to go first.
Sure, I can jump in. I think I highlighted a few in my presentation. The Village of Mount Prospect created a dedicated COVID-19 information page. So really it was a one-stop page for anyone within the village, a renter, a owner, a small business owner, to be able to get up-to-date information on resources. I think something else that's really important is leveraging some of those networks. So like Rodrigo mentioned, I mentioned partnering up with local social service agencies. We also utilize the schools within Mount Prospect to get information out. So hopefully that then gets into the hands of parents and families. Yeah, just networking with your local agencies. I mean, municipalities don't have access or don't have constant contact with everyone in the community. So it's important that you touch base with other agencies in the community and schools so that they're able to reach out to everyone else.
Great. Thoughts from anyone else?
And just speaking on behalf of what we've heard from other municipalities and local governments, I'd echo everything that Esther just said. I think one thing that is important to remember is that not everybody has access to broadband, and or the internet may not be their primary source of communicating. I certainly talked about how we're all forming resource pages, and that's really, really, really good. But in addition to that, we've heard of these various strategies to reach residents through institutions that are trusted to them, like the schools and libraries, and find other ways to connect them through outdoor fair, in-person outreach. In that way, it's very much like the 2020 census, which many local governments are trying to encourage participation in last year. Folks without the internet are hard to reach, but they're probably the most vulnerable and most in need of this assistance.
Yeah, I just want to add to that we are also, I know, trying to do some in person. We're willing to do it masked up, socially distant, doing it the grassroots way of giving a flyer out. We've even contacted small grocery stores in small towns to say, do you want our flyers? We want you to know about this program. This is where people are going every day still. So there are initiatives that we're taking to really try to get the word out. And obviously with Stacie and the Preservation Impact, we're collaborating weekly to ensure that, also as entities that have this money, that we're also doing everything possible to avoid duplication of benefits.
All right. I'm going to pull one of our questions that came in. So we had a question here. It says, one of the problems is LIHEAP uses under 200% of the poverty line that doesn't match up with the AMI percentage. Small households between 50 and 80% of AMI are not eligible for it. And the question got whisked away from me. Where did it go? There it is. And small households between 50 and 80% of AMI aren't eligible for it. Will any utility payments be included? So this might be a specific question, not just for the Mount Prospect program, but also for the IDA program as well.
For IDA, at this time, we are not doing utility payments. We do know that there is a need for that, but we're redirecting at this point. But we are looking at what we may do, what other initiatives.
Jonathan, just to clarify, the question was asking if there's any additional assistance for residents or for people who are not eligible for LIHEAP. Okay. Yeah, so our department, as part of the Emergency Financial Assistance Program, we also take into account FPL, but we also look at the person's situation. Is this a one-time crisis? Is there, is something, did they experience a life stressor that maybe that they need assistance with, but their income within the past 30 days may have been a little higher than that. So we definitely have funds available, but again, and I think I might not have mentioned that in my presentation, but our funds are specifically for Mount Prospect residents. But if they live outside of Mount Prospect and they contact our department, we'll certainly put them in contact with other agencies within their area that might be able to help.
Great.
And I would just add to that, you do have 6 hours from this moment to apply for Cook County. Cook County's emergency rental assistance program does include utility assistance. So that's just something to keep in mind. Also, in addition to that LIHEAP funding that I know does have a lower income threshold, if you go, and I believe this is on our resource page, but CUB, the Citizens Utility Board, has some nice resources about other types of utility assistance. ComEd is offering assistance directly right now. So there's other vehicles to check out as it relates to utility assistance.
Wonderful. I think that, so the next question I have here is, so Mount Prospect highlighted some of its own funding, CDBG and otherwise, that have gone towards tenant assistance. Rodrigo, can you talk a little bit about whether or not IDA ran into any issues in terms of working with other sort of local partners who are providing assistance during the round 1 of your emergency rental assistance program? Or was that smooth sailing?
Oh, I would never say round 1 was smooth sailing. I think in the first round, because of how fast it was, I think everyone that was offering some sort of assistance were not only trying to catch their breath, but try to figure it out. Our chief of staff puts it the best way is building the plane as we're flying it, right? We had to get this program out, and so did other entities and did the best that they could. I will say for this new round of funding, one of the things to point out is if someone received the grant for 2020 and they're still struggling to pay the rent, they're able to apply for this round, but will only receive funding from January 2021 and on. That is to ensure that we are not going to commingle those funds from 2020 and 2021.
Okay, great. Seeing what other questions that we've got that have come in. Stacie, if for CIC, what's the #1 thing you want municipalities to know about CIC's programs right now and how they can interact with them?
Well, certainly everyone should keep in mind that CIC is open for business. So, to the extent that someone needs financing, there are some lenders that have cut back on the type of activity that they're doing. We are, again, we're making loans, but also that I would just go back to the property management training. This is, it's about best practices. It brings the experts in as it relates to basic building operations or property taxes, whatever the issue is. And the third thing is just really getting to know what these resources are. There's new things coming up every day. So whether it's again, everyone has said this, whether it's the Preservation Compacts resource page or someone else's, just making sure you know everything that's out there.
Great. And then Kyle, how have you seen or been aware of municipalities staying up to date on the resources that are available in their area?
That's a good question. I'll start by saying part of what we've talked about, in our meetings is that it is pretty difficult to stay up to date on all of the resources that are out there. There's a lot of rental aid that was made available in the last 2 COVID relief bills that passed in December and March. It is primarily making its way to the state and the counties. A number of counties have opened or are soon to open their own programs, or in the case of Cook County, soon to close its own program. So check your county websites. I believe some others are partnering with IDA. I think, and Rodrigo would know for sure, but I think that's DuPage, Kane, and maybe Will. So check your county websites, check the IDA website, and I really encourage everyone to use the Preservation Compact website too. I really want to give a plug for this because it's hard to compile all of these resources in one place. It really is. If you can start with a base of information for organizations or entities that are doing this regularly, it can be a very good way to stay up to date.
Awesome. I was going to ask a question that came in here, was asking whether or not IDA would be willing to make available some of the information on how many households were helped by municipality with the program, the round one program last year. And yeah, I think that was the question.
Yeah, absolutely. If they go on our site, ida.org, they will find a fact book of what we did, factual stats on the first round, all sorts of stats on it. So they'll be able to download that.
Awesome. Yeah, I know for some of CMAP's own work, we've been able to get access to that data through IDA, and that's been super helpful for us for the housing work that we do with individual municipalities, the same for the Mayor's Caucus as well. So I know how valuable it can be. This one is also for you, Rodrigo. One valuable aspect of the application process with Cook County during this past round was the short screener that they asked clients to complete before launching into the whole application. Is this also going to be part of the IDA application process?
I'm not too familiar of the so it's like a pre-screen component for Cook County. So for IDA, in that first part of the application where the housing provider enters the pass-through rent and information about the housing provider and the tenant email address, it can deem you not eligible if you're not putting information that does not meet the standards of the program. So it may say no at that point, but it will be a 24 hours before you get the link, and then you can start the application.
Okay, so it sounds like maybe a partial
Similar.
component, and you're building it right now, so there's time for things to change between now and mid-May.
Yes.
Esther, so for Mount Prospect, what were the biggest challenges you ran into in terms of communicating with and working with local landlords?
Yeah, I think I can echo some of the other challenges that were discussed here. And I think landlords face some of the same challenges that tenants face. And part of that was technology issues. There are landlords that to this day don't necessarily utilize the email, don't utilize the internet. They keep track of their rent payments via a book. So I think that was probably one of the biggest challenges. And we were able to work around that. We were able to either meet with them in person so they can drop off the documents here. We can make copies for them. We sometimes walk them through how to take a snapshot of a document with their cell phone and then submit that by email. So I think technology barriers, technology literacy barriers were a big issue for many people.
Yeah. And then Esther, did you see any differences between some of the challenges you experienced on the landlord side versus your direct work with tenants or renters?
I don't think so. I think, I guess it's kind of cliche, but we were really in this all together, and people were experiencing some of the same barriers. If a tenant wasn't able to go online and complete an application, sometimes a landlord wasn't able to complete that application either. So I think both probably face some of the same barriers and issues.
Yeah. And then Kyle or Stacie, anything that you would add to this line of questions?
I would just underscore what Esther said, that some of these housing providers / landlords are fragile themselves and unsophisticated themselves. Again, they might be new to the business. They might not be new, but they may, again, have trouble with that technology. again, I would just say from a municipal standpoint, it's so useful for you to be doing this outreach and encouraging the communication between the housing provider and the tenant, because it could be that, you know, that's going to be a way for them to reach out to each other. And this communication for this application process is just critical.
Wonderful. Well, it looks like I've run out of my pre-prepared questions, and we also don't have any questions down in the Q&A. So maybe we'll give everybody just a little bit of time back in their day, which is always a wonderful thing on a Friday. Just a final question for our panelists. If there was one thing you think a municipality should be doing right now to help assist local renters and landlords, what would it be? And then we can start with whoever would like to go first.
Yes, I can jump in there. I'll get on my social work soapbox for 10 seconds. I think, you know, if anything, if a municipality can take anything away from today and from my presentation, is how important it is to invest in social and human services. And if they're able to develop a program such as ours, even on a smaller scale, what they're really investing in is in the well-being of the community. So, you know, hopefully they can take that information and hopefully it'll be useful.
I have two. One is for landlords and one is for the renters themselves. So one observation I have, you know, we've talked a lot about landlords and their, you know, engaging them. Oftentimes at the local level through licensing and crime-free programs, you've got a great list, email list of landlords that other entities don't have. So you can make a big impact by emailing them or contacting them and just letting them know that this stuff is available. And don't assume that they know. You may be the person that tells them. So that would be one recommendation. The other thing that we heard that I think is really cool and maybe something that other communities may be interested in emulating. The fair that I mentioned that SSMMA worked with Harvey on last year is kind of inspired by a lot of in-person outreach that people were doing outside for the 2020 census. You know, this and other aid programs are pretty similar. I think the pandemic has really put a focus on how hard it is to engage with folks that don't have the internet at home, or only have the phone and don't have broadband. So that may not fit every community, but I know there are a few people here who were also participated in that kind of engagement last year, and this could be the future for that kind of work locally.
I think Esther and Kyle are saying it best, but I think the only thing I would probably add is that just recognizing that this pandemic is affecting all of us in some form or fashion. So, and our most vulnerable communities are experiencing probably the worst of it. Creating that grace when we're talking to folks, as well as gathering all of the information that is out there for people, is really, really important. Be a connector of resources. That's what I would say. That would go a long way for communities that you're serving.
I would just build off of what everyone said. You all said it beautifully, but exactly what Rodrigo said. Be a connector of people. Be a connector of people to resources. Again, the tenant housing provider relationship, especially now, might be tense. And we've got to soften that because they have to work together and kind of be partners as they're applying for these resources. So do what you can to be the connector. To as amongst the people, but also to the resources, as Rodrigo just said.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to our panelists, Rodrigo, Esther, Kyle, and Stacie, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. As a reminder, this webinar has been recorded and will be available soon on CMAP's YouTube channel in case you want to revisit it or share it with others. Be on the lookout for additional resources from IDA, the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, Preservation Compact, CMAP, and others on this topic. And thank you again for joining us. Have a great day and a great weekend.